In this video, we're going to set up a hosting connection to our on-prem vCenter using our vSphere environment, which is running 6.7. Within my lab, I've got two ESXi hosts, ESXi01 and ESXi02. The vCenter server appliance is running as a virtual machine on ESXi01. And I'll show you the structure of my vCenter. That's my VCSA. I've got a top level data center called Carmo Data Center. Within the London folder, I've got a cluster which has got HA and DRS enabled, and then under that I've got two ESXi hosts, ESXi01, ESXi02. That's the vCenter server appliance running as a virtual machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a hosting connection within Studio, which will be used for Citrix MCS, which is a provisioning technology. It uses the vSphere APIs to connect to the hypervisor, so it will be able to create, delete, power on, power off, add hardware to virtual machines, etc. So to be able to do that, we've got to have a specific service account, which has been delegated the correct permissions within vCenter. I often see this done incorrectly. Either the vSphere single sign-on account administrator at vSphere.local is used, or the actual account, the MCS service account, is given the full administrator role, which is a bit overkill. So I'll show you how to set this up properly. We'll also set up a hosting connection to our public cloud provider, which is Microsoft Azure as a bonus as well, if you want to provision additional workloads within the public cloud. So let's begin. So the first thing I want to show you is I've got a service account on my domain controller. The service account is called Citrix MCS. It's just a standard account. It's got no additional permissions. It's just part of domain users, and that's the account that we'll be using in this example. So let's go on to our vCenter. If we go to menu and then under administration, what I've done is I've connected my vCenter to my Active Directory using an LDAP identity source. So you can see there carmo.com is listed as an identity source. What this allows me to do is it allows me to assign permissions to users and groups within my carmo.com Active Directory domain within vCenter. So I can apply those permissions on folders and also at the vCenter level within the inventory. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create a role. So the role will have granular permissions at various different entities within vSphere. Citrix do a very nice article, which is this one here. It's part of the product documentation. It lists every single granular permission that needs to be added to this custom role. So what we'll be doing, I'll do a couple of these to show you how it's done, and I'll show you how you assign it. But then I'll be converting that account to a full administrator, because there's quite a lot of permissions on here, which will take me quite a while to set up within the role. You need to set aside about 15 to 20 minutes here so you can actually create that role with all these granular permissions. So I'll show you how to do it, and then once I've done it, I'll be switching my account to a full administrator, which isn't the best practice. As I say, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be using the granular role. So to do that, within vCenter, what we're going to do is we're going to clone this existing role. So part of the article, as you can see here, it needs this permissions, and you get this when you use the read-only role. So what we'll do is we'll clone the read-only role. So we just click on the read-only role, click on this option here, and that clones that role. What we'll do, we'll give it a name. So we'll call it Citrix Prov for provisioning, and then we'll click on OK. Okay, and that's that role now created. So it's a duplicate of the read-only role. What we now need to do is we need to edit that role. So if we edit the Citrix Prov role, what we need to now do is look at this article and go through each of these granular permissions and add them to this role. So you can see the first one is data store allocate space and data store browse data store. So if we go down here, select data store, so allocate space and browse data store, they're the two granular permissions it needs within this role for the data store section. So that's that. The next one is it needs data store low level file operations as well. So let's add that one as well. That's that one done. So we've got allocate space, browse data store, low level operations. That's all on data store. Network assign. We've got network assign network. So if we go back to here, select network from the list, that one there, assign network. Okay, so you get the gist. As I say, I'm not going to go through every single one of these because it will take me 10-15 minutes and it will just be a slow process, and you don't want to see me just doing that. It will just take too long. So as I say, crack on with that. Once you've done that, you just click on next and then click on finish. So we've now got our custom role. It's got all the granular permissions that we need for MCS. The next thing we need to do is we need to assign that user account permissions at an entity. I normally do that at the vCenter level, and then we'll assign that user account this specific role, and then we'll inherit that down to all our clusters and our data data centers, etc. So right, let's do that. So if we go into home, go into host and clusters view, at the vCenter level, if we click on permissions, if we click on add, what we're going to do is we're going to search our Active Directory domain, so carmo.com. My account that I created, the service account, is Citrix MCS, and then this is where we get to choose the role. So what you would do is you would choose the Citrix Prov role, and then you would propagate that to children, and then click on OK. As I say, in this example, because I haven't done that, I'm just going to set it to the administrator role and propagate that to children. Once you've done it properly as per that article, you'll be able to select Citrix Prov there, or whatever you gave it as a name for the role. Select the new role and it will be absolutely fine. But just in this example, I'm going to be using the full administrator role. So we'll click on OK on that. And that's it done. If we now browse through the different entities, so we look at the data center level, you can see that account's got permissions. It's got the administrator role there. If we look on the London folder, permissions, again, it's an administrator there. On the cluster, you can see it's an administrator there. It's inheriting all the way down. It's going from vCenter to data center to cluster to host. So you can see there, Citrix MCS is defined at the vCenter level, and there we go. It's got the full administrator role again, defined in the vCenter, and then it's got the administrator role. So that's all we need to do from a permissions point of view. So the next thing we need to do now is we need to go onto our delivery controller. So this is our delivery controller, lon-ctx ddc01. I'm just going to log in on that. Once we've logged in, we need to install the vCenter certificate. So to get the vCenter certificate, it's very easy. You just go to the URL. So in my example, it's vcsa.carmo.com. I'm just using the self-signed certificate. I'm not using public CA cert or cert from my internal PKI. This is just a self-signed vCenter cert. So you can see here, click on certificate, click on details, do copy to file, next, base 64, give it a name, and then you basically have a CRT or a .cir file. So once you've got that, copy it over to your DDC, which I've done there. So that's my vCenter cert. You can see it's just a self-signed cert. So what we need to do now is we need to install this into our Trusted People certificate store. So we'll bring up an MMC console. We'll do add remove programs, certificates, add, choose computer account, next on that, local computer, finish, OK on that. We go down to Trusted People, right click, all tasks, import, next, browse. We'll select the desktop. We'll choose our vCenter certificate. Click on next again, click on finish, and the import was successful. So we've successfully imported our vCenter certificate on our delivery controller. What we need to do now is we need to set up the hosting connection within Citrix Studio. So if we open Citrix Studio, under the configuration node, if we click on hosting, we need to right click on that, do add connections and resources. From the drop down we'll choose vSphere. Under the connection address I'm going to type in my vCenter appliance. So the URL is https:// and then it's vcsa.carmo.com, and then the username that I'm going to be using is that service account, so it will be carmo.com, and then it will be / and then Citrix MCS. I'm going to enter the password on that, and then we'll just call that vSphere resources. Okay, we'll be using Citrix MCS, so we'll make sure that that Studio Tools Machine Creation Services is ticked. We'll click Next on that. So this will now connect to our vCenter using that service account. So that's it. That's why the permissions need to be in place. If those permissions are not in place, you won't be able to connect to your vCenter. So we now need to select a cluster. So if we expand my data center, we'll choose my Carmo cluster, click on OK. This gives us the option to choose our storage. In my lab, I've just got an iSCSI LUN, which is presented to my SXI host, so I'm actually using shared storage. So we'll tick this option here, use storage shared by hypervisors. If you've got local storage and using NFS, you can use things like IntelliCache with Zen Server, but in this example it's just your standard shared storage using basically LUNs. So because we're using iSCSI, we'll make sure use storage shared by hypervisor selected. We now get to choose our data store. For our OS, our personal vDisk and our temporary data. Personal vDisk is deprecated. I don't know why that's still there. The temporary storage is used for the MCS IO, so the MCS write cache when you're using MCS IO, and then the OS is where our virtual machines, the difference in disk and the identity disk, etc. will reside. So we'll make sure we tick all of them. We've only got one data store. We'll click Next on that. Now we get to choose the VM port groups. Typically you would have separate VM port groups for all your different VLANs. So you might have a VDI VLAN, SBC VLAN, etc, etc. In my lab I've just got a single VM port group, which is just called the default VM network. So I'll just select that one. Name for the resources, we'll just call it SBC, and then we'll click on Next on that, and then we'll click on Finish. Okay, so that's the hosting connection set up correctly to our on-prem vCenter. You can see there, if we now do test connection, just to make sure everything's worked correctly, we should get no errors. We should be able to successfully connect to our hypervisor, and as you can see there's no errors there. So yep, that's all successful. That certificate, the vCenter certificate, you need to make sure that's in that trusted people store on all your delivery controllers within the site, so make sure you import that, and that's literally all you have to do. So that's our hosting connection set up to vCenter. What I'll do now is I'll show you how to set up the hosting connection to Azure, which we'll use as our public cloud provider to provision additional workloads. So I'll show you how to set up a hosting connection to Azure RM. So to set up the hosting connection to Azure RM, we need to log into the Azure Portal. So I've gone to portal.azure.com. I've logged in with my account, which is admin@carmo.com. I've got on my domain controller, I've got Azure AD Connect, and I'm synchronizing my domain information to Azure AD. I've also set up a custom domain within Azure AD to my carmo.com domain. So if we come under here, under users, you can see all my users in my Active Directories being synced to Azure AD. So what we need to basically do is we need to create an application, a service principal. That service principal will be granted the contributor role on the subscription, and that's what MCS and Citrix require when setting up a hosting connection to Azure RM. You can do it automatically through Studio by entering your subscription ID, but I've seemed to be recently having an error with that, so I've had to set up this manually to get it working. I'll show you how to set it up manually, it's handy to know anyways. So we basically come under Azure Active Directory, and then under app registrations, what we need to do is we need to create a new app registration. So we'll click on new registration, we'll call this Citrix -XD, and then we'll just click on register. We'll take the defaults. Accounts in this organization directory only, Carmo default directory, single tenant. So that's just our application getting created here within Azure AD. So we'll click on register, and that's it created. What we now need to do is we need to create a client secret on this application. So if you come under certificates and secrets, we can click on this option here, new client secret. We'll just call it, for a description, we'll just call it client secret and then Citrix, so we know what it is. We'll set it to never expire. We'll click on add, and that's the client secret created. That's all we have to do from the application section within Azure AD. What we now need to do is we now need to assign this service principal the contributor role on our subscription. So to do that, we come under subscriptions. So let's do a search for that. There it is there. We'll click on our Azure subscription, and then the access control IAM, we'll click on that, and then basically we'll click on add role assignments. And the role that we need to basically select is a contributor role, so we'll choose that. And then the user that we're going to be using, this is the application that we've just created, so it's Citrix-XD. There you go. So we're granting the contributor role to this application that we've just created. So we'll click on save, and then that's it added. Okay, so that's done, and that should be all that we need to do. So what we now need to do is we need to get our Active Directory Azure AD ID. We need to get the application ID, and we need that client secret. So to get that, we'll come down to Azure Active Directory. We'll click on app registrations, and you can see we've got this application here. So if we click on it, what we have is we have an application ID, we've got a directory ID, which is our Azure AD ID, and then we've also got the client secret as well. When we come under here, we've also got this value here, the client secret. So we need to take all three of those values. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy them into a notepad on my delivery controller. What I'll do is I'll grey this out as well, so you won't be able to see this. Let me fire up a notepad. Okay, so let's go back to Azure. So client secret, we'll copy that. So client secret, paste that in. Okay, that's that done. So we know which one's which. So that's that one. Next one, we need our Azure AD, so we'll copy that, our directory ID, so I'm going to paste that in. Azure AD, paste that into there. And then the final one is our application ID. So if we go into here, this one here, application client ID, we'll copy that, paste that into there, and then app ID, paste that into there. So we've now got all three. So what we now need to do is, if we go into the hosting connection, we'll click on add again to add a new hosting connection. We'll create a new connection this time, and we'll choose Azure, Microsoft Azure. So this is Azure RM. Azure Classic is deprecated, so we'll be using Azure RM. What we'll be doing, it will be Azure Global. We're not using US government, China or Germany, so it'll be Azure Global. We'll be using MCS, so we'll make sure that's selected. And now this is the screen that I was talking about. Previously I was able to type my subscription ID in here and then authenticate to Azure using my account, which was a global administrator, and then it would create the service principal automatically. But that for some reason isn't working for me this time. I don't know if it's because I've done it in the past or what. So what we need to do is we need to choose this option here, use existing, and then we're going to paste in all these IDs that it's asking for. So it's asking for subscription ID, Active Directory ID, application ID, and the secret. So we've got all of these in this text file, apart from my subscription ID, which I'm going to get now. Let me just get that one. Okay, there it is there. I'm going to paste, let's click on that, and then subscription ID, we'll paste that into here as well. It's a bit of a long-winded way to do it, but this is the manual way to do it, so it's handy to know this way as well. So we've got everything that we need, so I'm going to copy first of all the subscription ID. So I'm going to copy that, paste that into there. Next it's the AD ID, so that's my Azure AD tenancy. I'm going to copy that. One goes in there. Then it's the application ID, so this one's the app ID. Copy that, put that one into there. And then finally it's the client secret that we created, so that's the top one. Copy that, and then we'll paste that into there. Okay, click on OK, give it a name, so we'll just call it Azure RM, and then we'll click on next. So if everything's worked how it should, we should get to the next stage. There we go. So it's now asking us which region we're going to be using. So as I'm based in the UK, we'll choose UK South as our Azure region. Click next on that. We'll now choose our network. So what I've done is I've created a resource group within my Azure subscription. The resource group is called RG-CTX-Infra, and then I've got a couple of subnets within there. So let's just call this Azure Resources. So these are my resource groups, so I'll choose that resource group, and then we'll choose our networks, and then we'll choose next on that. We'll click on finish, and we've now successfully created a hosting connection to Azure. So this will allow us, once we set up a site-to-site VPN to Azure from our on-prem environment, we'll then be able to provision workloads within Azure and connect to them through the site-to-site VPN. So I'll do that a little bit later once we start creating machine catalogs. One of the videos I'll do is how to create an MCS master image in Azure, create a machine catalog, and then connect to those resources within Azure. So that will be in further videos. So that's it for now. So this video, just to recap, we've set up a hosting connection to our on-prem vCenter. We've also set up a hosting connection to our public cloud provider, which is Azure. So this will now give us the ability to use provision technologies like MCS to provision workloads both on-prem and in the public cloud. So what we've basically got here now is we've got a hybrid environment where our control layer is all on-prem, but we've then used the public cloud for burst capacity to provision additional workloads in the public cloud if we've not got enough resources in our on-prem data center. So that's it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Thank you very much.